All right, I think we're going to get started then. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Frieda with Inbound Logistics. Thank you for joining us today for this Inbound Logistics webinar presented by Pierbridge. I will turn it over now to Scott Moore, Vice President of Marketing for Pierbridge. But before that, I do want to go through a couple of house rules. Everyone will be muted upon entry. There is a chat window for questions to submit to anyone presenting, so feel free to use that to submit any questions that you might have. Other than that, stand by, and I will turn it over now to Scott Moore, Vice President of Marketing for Pierbridge. Scott, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it. And thanks to the rest of the Inbound Logistics team for putting this together for us today. We're joined on the call by Banyan Technology and Connectship, two great partners of Pierbridge. Our topic, and we've turned it into a bit of a transportation town hall, where shippers and technology leaders can share insights into how COVID-19 is impacting the shipping and delivery industry. So we've divided things up into 4 topics, but first I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today, and also a special thanks to those of you that took the time to fill out the survey and submit some questions. We've amalgamated the results here, and we're going to answer some of those questions that were provided during our talk today. The topic is around the impact of COVID-19 on shipping and delivery, and like much of the news and information surrounding COVID-19 is mixed, varied, and sometimes conflicting. This has been confirmed by the responses and questions that you submitted to us. The impact on the respondents has been mixed, varied, and sometimes conflicting. We're hoping today to give you a glimpse into what people are experiencing now, maybe some insights into what they expect to see as the pandemic plays out over time, and some thoughts on what we believe and maybe hope will happen in the post-pandemic shipping and delivery world. We've divided the topic into 4 areas: the impact on transportation cost, the impact on omnichannel fulfillment, the impact felt by logistics providers, both carriers and 3PLs, and the impact on transportation visibility and control. With each topic, we're going to share some news very quickly. We'll also then discuss some of the results from the survey, and then answer some specific questions that have been provided by the audience. As Jeff mentioned, you can submit questions in the chat box, and we'll answer those at the end. We've also got 2 audience polls that we're planning to run throughout the presentation. That will give you an opportunity to provide some immediate feedback. After the webinar today, we're going to provide everybody with a soft copy of the presentation. This will have the links to the news articles that we've accumulated here, and we'll also provide a copy of the full survey response so you guys can do your own research and analysis. We'll also make a recorded version of this webinar available. Just a little bit before I introduce our panel, this is the breakdown of those who submitted to the survey, so you know what industry and roles they're from. They pretty much fall into the first half or so of the cargo chain. We had manufacturers at about a bit over 15%, distribution and warehousing at over 5%, and 3PLs making up a big chunk of the respondents at 30%. We also had some carriers represented, making up about 15%. In terms of roles, consider most of the respondents to fall into the supply chain doers. They're either that management level at 32% or the execution level, 36%. We also had about another third of respondents that fall into the company leadership or ownership or P&L category. Our first speaker and my boss, Bob Malley, is the Managing Director of Pierbridge. It's a subsidiary of WiseTech Global and the developer of Transstream, an enterprise multi-carrier management solution. Bob has been in the business for 30 years and I think was first introduced one of the first multi-carrier parcel shipping systems to the market. Our next speaker is Lance Healy, the founder and chief innovation officer from Banyan Technology. He's been delivering logistics solutions for over 20 years, and he has a focus on delivering solutions to the consumers of LTL services from retail to commercial and industrial, and providing connectivity to 3 of the top 5 freight brokers in the market, as well as hundreds of other clients. Our third panelist is Tim Leary, the Director of Operations at ConnectShip. He's been in the transportation industry for 18 years with various roles within small package and contract logistics operations, customer program management, and most recently as the Global Operations Manager for Customer Program Management within Customer Solutions at UPS. Great, thanks guys for joining us. And if you follow Pierbridge, Banyan, and Banyan Technology and ConnectShip, you'll know that these 3 guys get together quite frequently and do webinar presentations. So it's always a joy to work with you guys, and we appreciate the time that you're all putting in. Our first topic for today is going to be around the impact of COVID-19 on transportation costs. And I think the headlines have been fairly varied, it's fair to say. Carriers are facing a sustained holiday season peak. Freight and spot quote costs are fluctuating, and some shippers are experiencing higher costs that they're mitigating with new solutions and approaches. And that sort of varied response or varied impact was really, I think, and just in one stat here, where on average, those that responded were plus 2% on their change in transportation costs. So not that significant, but the swings were really quite dramatic. There was a high of plus 76%. There was somebody who's experiencing plus 66% at the high end, or the increases, and then decreases, have dropped as low as 60% for some people and 44% for others. So I'll get out of the way really of the experts and pass things over to Lance. You want to tell us what your thoughts are on some of these responses, please?
Yeah, no, sure. Appreciate it, Scott. And thanks everybody for joining. I think if we focus, on it's kind of the tale of 2 markets in terms of transportation, or several, but if I speak to a little bit on the LTL full truckload side, where there was a huge decrease in spot market rates, we kind of look at the industry as a perfect storm that hit. You've got completely reduced demand on the market, a lot of company shutdowns, so there's some capacity on the road, and that included increased capacity from those folks that were contract carriers that may have not been in the spot market, but when their manufacturers, distributors are shut down, they flooded into the spot market to look for some additional loads as well. So you had increasing capacity at the same time. There's a big drop in demand, and just to layer it in on top, you had a massive drop in fuel charges, which again, for more on the LTL side, that is fuel surcharges are a big revenue opportunity there. So that had a huge impact. LTL carriers, we saw it around a 20%, 18 to 23% reduction in terms of overall volume. So they were, but those that have annualized contract rates weren't as affected as the spot market on it. But those carriers that did take advantage of some of the disruptions and were agile in how they're pricing were certainly fared better than those that were more etched in stone in a lot of their annual contracts. But that's what we've seen on the freight side, a lot of the reduction piece. But Tim, what did you see on your side, cost of carriers?
Thanks, Lance. Again, similar to you, I wanted to thank the audience here. I know a lot of you guys and women are running teams and are looking for insight. But as we get into the parcel piece, I think one of the things that is being laid bare is the importance of supply chains more so than ever. But what I'm seeing and what we're seeing on the parcel side is what you'd expect for cost increases on labor, and then health and safety costs. And oftentimes they're hand in glove, right? You have to have additional protocols and processes in place to have supplies, to have PPE for your employees if they're going to actually go into work. And in some cases, some of the carriers have been challenged in their models where whether they're employees or contractors, depends on if they're going to be showing up to work or not. Ultimately, what we see from a cost perspective, in addition to just general labor, is labor acquisition costs. So a lot of the carriers can't put on labor on the streets or in their warehouses fast enough. If you traditionally look at FedEx and UPS, they're now competing with the big box retailers and grocers and Amazon to get labor in the door, trained and ready. None of this was planned in 2019 business planning. Additional costs that we're seeing are kind of the oversized goods that are now going direct to consumer. That used to be business to business shipments that are now direct to consumer, and the major carriers are adding what they feel are justified surcharges for the higher cost to push those through their network. And so that surge in oversized goods that they're seeing are having a surcharge put on them as well. And ultimately, a lot of the networks today, they're sitting there saying, hey, I got to cap how much volume you give to me because I can't have my network go down. I can't have the surge of volume cripple my service commitments I've made in general across our network. So you're starting to see those added caps come into play as well. So generally what I'm seeing on the parcel side. Bob, do you have any comment about shippers?
Yeah, I do, Tim. Thanks everybody for joining. As Tim mentioned, B2C volumes, parcel volumes are way up while B2B volumes are way down. And certainly, we're seeing that trend on our Transstream shipping platform. I'd only add that, COVID has really just accelerated the types of volume trends that were already well underway over the last few years, which is creating cost pressures on carriers, as Tim said. But I think it's the drop in margins that we have to really watch. It's because those are the ones that will have to somehow pass on to shippers. So you can start to see the effect of, on margin with the major carriers in their Q1 financial reports. FedEx reported margins of less than 3%, despite the drop in fuel prices, right? So there are analysts who expect that it will take at least 3 years for them to build up to 7 to 8% margins again. And even FedEx opted to suspend forecasts because of the uncertainty for 2020 earnings and committed to attacking their cost base. And then UPS, while their revenue increased almost 9.5%, their net income was off 13% due to what they called Corona headwinds. So despite, and then they're going to reduce CapEx, capital investments. Bezos is committed to, committing Q2 profits of $4 billion just to address COVID costs. So you can see that, to the extent that the margins are squeezed, they're going to have to somehow change their operating costs, and that will have an effect on, business shipping prices. So you can already see the response already in the form of surcharges. UPS put a peak surcharge on international origins, a higher one for China. They put a surcharge on UPS ground residential and SurePost of 30 cents per package, and also large packages. FedEx put a surcharge on Express and TNT International, and Green Mountain recently reported that they expected to see more surcharges in the future. They've already also changed their services. As Tim mentioned, FedEx is capping how many packages they're willing to take from large retailers who are shipping from stores. Low density, a few shipments coming from each store puts pressure on their ability, on their capacity, and their profitability. Both UPS and FedEx suspended money back guarantees and delivery signatures, and so forth. So you would think that, those being the cost and margin pressures, there's still competition, particularly from USPS for residential deliveries. And while the White House is threatening to cut off emergency funding for USPS unless they raise their package rates, the USPS is still a viable competitor. So I guess I would say, in summary, B2C volumes are up, more B2Bs are down, and they're going to have to make a change in their business model in order to make up the difference in cost.
Thanks, Bob, Lance, Tim. Couple questions came in from the survey, so maybe the first one I'll pass to you, Lance. What are the plans for pricing for the future that would lead to fair trade among shippers, carriers, and brokers?
Boy, yeah, this has been a hot potato in the freight markets for the last couple of weeks since kind of the May Day protests. There is a lot of the steep drop in the spot market, really exposed variances where, and they were accusing a lot of 3PLs of being bad actors because they were making a lot of margin because they already had contracted rates and doing those types of things. It was a very temporary situation. While there's always bad actors in any role in 3PLs and carriers, et cetera, really you look at most of the market and it is a pendulum swing that comes with pricing. In 2018, pricing was phenomenal for a lot of the carriers. And it swung back really quickly in the other direction, but it's moving back, and the rates and whatnot are climbing up. There's been proposed regulation on profit margins. There's been a proposed legislation for visibility on the bill of lading, so everybody can have full transparency on how rates are being distributed. My personal opinion, op-ed piece here, that is a very bad idea. And I think it's a temporary fix to what is a market economy. There's regulation, enforcement, even more litigation that would come with that if things changed. I don't think that's a good idea at all. So I would, my wish, my want is let the market level itself back out, and it will do so, and I think it'll do so pretty quickly.
Great. And that second question, will carriers be fighting over price to get customers in the freight space?
Of course, yes. And right now, everybody is still working towards recovery. I think, and you guys may see this in the other markets as well, but right now everybody's really, especially for the contract business and the relationship business outside of the spot buy, they're really trying to preserve their market. And kind of in these trying times is where we see relationships, they either get solidified and reinforced, or they break down. Really based on how both sides of the partnerships react. So, Tim, are you seeing that in parcel and customers as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, right now the focus is on the higher margin industries. So the big players are fighting over the healthcare and life sciences higher margin business. As I said earlier, they're already fighting on the surcharges and how to manage different volume caps. And in fact, the two big ones in the U.S. are turning away even their major shippers that maybe have played a little bit of a pricing game with both of them, jumping back and forth, and both FedEx and UPS are trying to tie in with longer term strategic customers. And on top of that, I know that both organizations are going to their top 100 shippers and telling them, hey, there's only so much volume we can take, and setting up holiday or peak-like parameters for them to take volume. So the other thing that's happening is dynamic pricing by customer. So traditionally, you might have segmentation by middle market, small, medium business, and enterprise. There's more sub-segmentation going on within those categories. And that concept of dynamic pricing is something that's at play as well. Bob talked about the surge in volume. So to be a little bit more specific and clear, for month over month, April and May, we're looking at 30 to 40% year over year increases in volumes. And that is peak-like holiday level volumes with a much higher 70% mix business to consumer. And so as everybody on this call knows or should know, is how do you sustain profitability with that when you're increasing your delivery mileage? I think UPS stated that they were up 10 to 15% on mileage through April and May for their service providers. So that's the real challenge right now. So they are fighting on price. It becomes even more challenging when you can't maintain profitability with the shipment mix. Bob, any thoughts about what you're seeing over on carriers and fighting over pricing?
Yeah, I would only add to what you said, Tim, and is that the carriers are going to go after the B2B shippers that are represent probably a higher density on pickup and a limited number of stops. I think that same UPS report said that UPS stops are up 15%, right? And every time they have to stop, that's a cost. So, but the fact that they're going to be fighting over, the unicorns that are out there, the B2B shippers, will mean that will, further squeeze their margins, which is it's going to be tough for them. At the same time, we'll talk about it later, but omni-channel trend where even big B2B shippers are starting to reduce their costs by shipping from more locations, so that that B2B shipper that ships from one warehouse to several locations probably is it's on the way to becoming a thing of the past.
Since you brought it up, Bob, we can shift over to our next topic, which is the impact of COVID on omnichannel. And I think it is pretty clear that it has significantly changed retail and the retail landscape now and possibly forever. Those that aren't online, they've had to rush to do it, or in some cases, they've suffered sometimes some dire consequences. And we're going to talk a little bit about the impact this has had on the adoption of omni-channel fulfillment strategies for retailers, 3PLs, and manufacturers. So here's what the survey had to say. And Bob, you want to keep going and comment on that in the first few bullets there?
Yeah, I guess I would, particularly focus on that 15%. I agree that the implication that that omni-channel, implementing an omni-channel strategy as a short-term fix is probably unrealistic. Omni-channel strategies take, big investments, a long time to implement, and they need to get tweaked to get the right balance of ship from stores and from supplier, from 3PL. So those retailers in particular don't have an omni-channel strategy in place. It's going to be really tough going, and you can see that in the recent bankruptcies of J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, Modell's, Pier 1 was another one. So even for those retailers who have supplemented effectively their brick and mortar offline sales with omni-channel online selling and fulfillment, it's still unlikely that they're going to make up the revenue difference with online sales or BOPUS. So I think I was reading an article this past week about Nike. Jim Donahue came, Donahue came on the board as CEO last year, made a commitment to digital transformation, online sales and so forth, moved away from Amazon as a channel. And as a result, their online sales grew 50% over the year. But really, their online sales still represents only 20% of Nike revenue. So even though the investments paid off, they're not enough to replace store revenue. They shut down 7,000 stores in China alone. But what's interesting about their China experience is China started opening up their stores in March, and even when they opened up to 80% of the stores in China, their online sales continued to grow by 30%. So it's as if a new normal had emerged during the shutdown, where digital is kind of leading the way with supplemental physical retail. So even for businesses that are 100% online, like Amazon, their revenue was way up, 26% during the first quarter, but they saw a 29% drop in profitability because of all the costs, carrying costs for inventory and more hires, and trying to protect their employees from COVID. So so it's a long, omni-channel is long term, but it's not a magic fix. Tim, I don't know what you're seeing in 3PLs, but
you're seeing the same constraints from capacity that you are in the transportation networks. So very, very succinctly, 3PLs, at least in the U.S., Canada, and Western Europe, are at capacity and overcapacity in a lot of times right now. And there's been little to no planning for this volume surge. I mean, we're 8 or 9 weeks in, depending on where in the world you are. And so that impact has a cascading effect, and I'm sure Lance will talk to it on the carrier side, or the LTL and truckload side. It impacts late loads, dwell times, reentry delays, all those things that have knock-on impacts, and everybody thinks of supply chain management and just-in-time delivery. I don't think it's going away in full, but it's going to have a knock-on impact to consumer expectations. I think the challenge right now for folks, when they think of, hey, we'll just bump up inventory, we'll turn up the manufacturing dial. Those capacity constraints in the 3PL world, that's not going to be resolved overnight. There are knock-on impacts with commercial real estate, and I think where you're going to be allowed to have that buffer inventory is in health and safety or pharmaceutical or therapeutics. That hey, this is a critical infrastructure that we need. We need that inventory in these locations. I think that would be the sole segment that would be an exception to that. I think the medium and long term, it's too blurry really to paint the picture of what's going to change. But I will tell you that health and safety and healthcare type related inventory will take precedence over all other types of industry segments in squeezing or getting availability for 3PL warehousing space. Lance, what are you seeing with last mile purchase and delivery related to this?
Yeah, for a lot of the folks that are doing last mile, certainly at the start of the pandemic, nobody wanted to do a home delivery, and nobody wanted to perform home deliveries, and certainly nobody wanted strangers coming into their homes, and so we just ran off a cliff in terms of some of the heavy haul white goods purchases, those types of things. But I do see that accelerating really dramatically now. That will be starting to pick up and start accelerating through the end of the year. I'm going into some more reasons for that now, but a lot of the folks in the heavy haul residential deliveries took either just cut off operations or took a pause in it for a while, and now we're seeing that start to open back up. Thanks.
Great. So let's look a little bit more to after the pandemic, what the future may hold for omnichannel fulfillment. Tim, you want to take a stab at some of these stats from the survey?
Which of the following apply? So I'm going to go through this, and I think one of the challenges, it's actually, I'm actually surprised that this number is so low. On 32% are more likely to diversify. I'm wondering what the other 68% are seeing or what their experience has been. But I think dual and multi-sourcing strategies have really been in flight from a number of organizations over the last few years anyways, with some of the trade barrier concerns, the issues between China and the US, and some of the other trade agreements that have either been stalled or just got finished last year. So I think some of that has been in play, and similar to what Bob stated earlier, this has just accelerated some of that strategic speed to dual source and multi-source, so that you drop your risk, or at least you try to mitigate your risk. And so I look at this and I wonder, is it not a higher percentage than 32% compared to what I've seen or what I've heard in the industry? I think one of the big challenges is variability in supply chain and how that impacts inventory requirements. I think the challenge that you're going to see as you get into the next stat about the buffer inventory is, how long are my lead times? What is the optimization required, and what are the drivers required to meet a performance target that I've set as an enterprise or a strategy? I think in the current environment, you can't use past assumptions. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. But if you think of things like food, medication, some of the health and safety items that we've talked about earlier, there aren't accurate models for consumer and end user behavior. I think things like buffer stock within health and safety items, as I noted earlier, will be something that gets precedence. But as you look at, let's say, retail, certainly, that won't be a topic of concern, or even high tech and industrial automotive, there's just going to be different supply chain strategies that are used to address specifically buffer stock. Bob, do you want to talk about things, as I talked about risk mitigation, how that's going to impact maybe these dual sourcing or multi-sourcing strategies and buffer inventory? Because I think risk mitigation is going to be a big issue that organizations and enterprises look at, in addition to that traditional procurement and supply chain management aspect.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at boards of directors, you look at CEOs, a big part of their job is assessing and mitigating risks. I mean, a public company owes that to their investor base, and I can't imagine there's a public company in existence that has been relying on China, believing that that the supply chains would just continue unabated, aren't taking a second look at it and saying, wait a minute, those supply chains are pretty brittle and subject to politics and subject to plagues. So yeah, I think for that reason, even if there's an impact on earnings and costs, I think boards are going to need to increasingly take diversification into account as a matter of risk mitigation. Yeah, for sure.
Great, thanks, Bob and Tim. Let's move now, and I'll just ask our Jeff from Inbound Logistics to launch the first poll. How has COVID-19 changed your execution of diversified fulfillment strategies? There's 5 choices: has not changed, has changed a little, moderate amount of change, a lot of change, and a great deal of change. And then we'll put Bob and Tim on the hot spot to
strongly
answer.
about it.
Feel strongly about it, Bob?
I feel strongly about all of them. No, I would say there's at least a moderate amount of change that is being considered. I don't think, maybe
Yeah.
it's not execution, but the at least the planning phases of diversification is probably already underway at the board level.
It looks like the results are holding that up. Tim, anything there? We'll end it now. Seems like people have stopped submitting answers. There's the results.
Yeah, I'll let you show the
Oh.
results. I'm not a good prognosticator.
Okay,
Huh.
there we go. The results are there.
Okay. So 79% either a lot of or moderate. Okay. I mean, from a fulfillment strategy execution, I mean, I think some of the things that are out there, you talk about same day delivery is getting something today versus tomorrow is big a deal. Route optimization, enforcing maximums on orders so that folks aren't hoarding important supplies. I think some of those things are changing from an execution standpoint for fulfillment. I think looking at diversified suppliers and adding capacity, those are all there. The question is, what's the threshold for a great deal of change as it relates to the folks who responded here? And ultimately, I think the majority of folks here have been impacted. And to Bob's point, I think certainly on the planning side, but I think everybody has had some level of execution change if they're in the operations or procurement or fulfillment space.
Great, thanks. We can stop sharing that, Jeff, now. Move on to our next slide. There we go. So we're moving on to our next topic, the impact of COVID-19 on logistics providers, the carriers and 3PLs. And it's clear that it's been quite a bit of disruption of services for all of them. And I think, you know, Lance and Tim and Bob have already talked about this a bit, that need to diversify suppliers to secure the supply chains now and in the future. And I thought it's fair to say that the survey respondents are already managing a diverse portfolio of service providers. On average, our respondents had 8 LTL carriers, 15 local carriers, and 5 national carriers, parcel carriers. So Lance, do you want to jump in here and let us know what's happening to providers during and after the pandemic?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So, you know, with the 45 adjusting prices with current fluctuations, yes, that reads with what we're seeing around our client base. You've got some shippers that are engaging either with the carriers or their 3PL partners. Some of them are trying to break contracts and renegotiate based on the current market conditions where the pricing is substantially less than maybe what the contracted rates are. It's a short-term strategy. If you're looking at that door swings both ways. So when capacity does get tight, the memories are long. So I throw that out as cautionary. Other suppliers are working with their carriers on some more reasonable methods, asking for extensions on payment terms, but maybe not diversifying as much as really engaging with them as a partner. Pricing wise, you know, DAT just reported, you know, the other day, just another 23-cent drop on a per mile rate to about 155, which is extraordinarily low as a national average for a cost per mile. But those, both the impact and the recovery, are not evenly distributed. There's pockets of hot spots and what were good head hauls previously, maybe not so much now because the industrial base hasn't come back online yet. So it's really changing the mix of the market. And for those that have seen the 50% that have seen local carrier disruptions, you know, absolutely, for them, everybody's at home buying stuff. And so not only has the demand gone way up, but even when working with the CLDA, really great trade organization there. A lot of the drivers have seen 20 to 30% of their workforce just walk off the job. They didn't want to go in and do pickups and deliveries at hospitals and other institutions. So they opted out of the market, which really affected their ability to perform. But then that was also compounded and continued to be compounded by the protocols at pickups and deliveries. Some folks aren't allowed in the facilities. They have to get their temperature checked. And all those inside the building processes that have to go through have extended that really dramatically. And then for those, the percentage that are looking at using brokers and transportation marketplaces, again, not a surprise there. The spot market has way undercut most contracts, and a lot of folks that are maintaining their contracts and their commitments to the carriers and the contracts are then, running to the spot market rather than putting more onto their existing contracts to try to get those deals that are out there right now, because there's so much capacity on the market for truckload LTL. So it's kind of what we're seeing. I get it. Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
How about you? Yeah.
Yeah, so in my view, the investment in IT, I think that was already underway, and it was a long way down the tracks. I think this is accelerating some of those decisions with a caveat. You may have had folks that have made business decisions in late 2019 who said, hey, we're going to invest in a new capability, let's say demand-driven supply chain tools or TMS. And yet the decision is put on hold because, hey, we need that cash. We can't have an expenditure now. We need that cushion in case something goes wrong. I don't know how many people on this call probably have IT projects that are frozen because of the concern of, is this the right investment? But overall, that lack of visibility or control of the supply chain is essentially flying blind. And I think what you see is financial officers or procurement officers say, hey, if we can't see and then control, let's say, our different carriers or sourcing strategies with different tools, then we're going to add costs in other places. And so I think that the automation and digitization has already been underway. The challenge is for individual organizations to say, hey, this is going to help with other impacted costs that I may not be able to address if I don't have that visibility and control. So I know by organization and by strategy in organization, it's a tough and challenging environment, but ultimately those two values, visibility and control, I think trump the concerns about costs that could spin out other expenses or other challenges with their networks. Bob, you want to comment on the 3PLs and shipping carriers in the polls there that you have shown?
Yeah, I would only, I was surprised actually that only 11% said that they would be more likely to use 3PL providers. And I think that's probably because the term 3PL covers a lot of territory. I think if you look at it, there are probably 4 3PL types. There's the domestic transportation management that Lance covered. That decreases in demand there. Even C.H. Robinson was down last year, almost 6%. International transport management, that's down because, freight forwarders have been disrupted by tariff wars and COVID. Dedicated contract carriage is pretty sticky. They won't change much because they have contracts in place, as Lance alluded to. But I think the one that I think would get the most attention in terms of 3PL services is value-added warehousing and distribution. It was strong in 2019. I think it grew 18%, mostly on the strength of e-commerce volumes, because retailers are reluctant to be too dependent, like Nike, on Amazon or Alibaba. So 3PLs have been gearing up to offer more multi-client warehouse and fulfillment operations. So I think, but on the other hand, Amazon is competing for labor and warehouse space, and that's going to cost those 3PL cost to rise, and that will have to be transferred to company pricing. So so I think the 3PL market of anything, I would expect people to start picking up on value-added warehousing.
Great. So we'll turn to another question here, and I think we'll need to be just a bit quicker in our responses. Have you felt the impact of layoffs at carriers and brokers? Lance, do you want to take the first crack at this?
Yeah, and real quick, not surprising to see disruptions, especially in the LTL markets. And just a comment on that is that because it's so unevenly distributed, if it was evenly distributed, it would be much easier to absorb. But it's just people went from big anchor, industrial commercial clients that were kind of anchor clients for them as part of their route pickups or route deliveries. When they shut down, that blows up the whole route plan. And the LTL carriers are already operating on thin margins, so trying to rechange their route plans, and they're still constrained by their pricing contracts, has been a real challenge for them. And their only remedy really is changing the route plans, which interrupt service. So it's a natural piece. I think it'll go away. It'll come back to normal as things start to open up again.
Right. Tim, any comments? No, you wanted to weigh in on the reduced capacity point there.
Yeah, I mean, retailers are getting pinched on both sides, right? So increased demand in a different model, and then the capacity removal. Think about the same-day delivery companies that are out there. I think in a past discussion, Bob, I talked about somebody has a phone in a car, they're a delivery company. But part of that played up and supported some of those retailers who would have in one of their distribution centers a mix of the big parcel integrators, direct ship, drop ship, LTL, truckload, and then the same day delivery capabilities all out of the same space. So they're getting pinched on both ends. And the challenge is how do you meet your customer demand and make money? And so retailers specifically are really challenged right now.
Great, thanks. 2 questions from the survey. Maybe Lance, you want to take a quick stab at the first one? Do you envision what? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the new normal, sure. No, I don't think there will be a normal in terms of back to exactly where it was, and primarily because of shift on behavior, on customer behavior. All of the kind of experiential discretionary spending, concerts, sports, movies, vacations, all of those things I think are going to shift towards durable goods and adult fun toys like jet skis and hot tubs and home renovations / home offices now. So I think the volumes will come back, but I think the mix and what that's going to look like is going to be very different. So yeah, I think that's my comment there.
Yeah. And the second question, Tim?
So I don't think for the foreseeable future that China is going to be knocked off its pedestal as what do they call it, the workshop of the world for the foreseeable future. But I think this has revealed challenges, as Bob talked about, how brittle supply chains are with lead times. I think they were exposed to some of the trade war footing that the U.S. and China were on. But I think risk mitigation and the pandemic have exposed those challenges. I think what you're going to see is the U.S. and Europe will continue to import goods from China, but they're probably going to come through other countries like Vietnam, Malaysia. But there's still a challenge about raw materials. So the U.S. and Europe will still get their stuff from Southeast Asian countries, but raw materials will still come out of China. So it's just adding another waypoint in there. So yeah, I think that there is going to be some impacts. You're going to see more nearshoring with Mexico and the trade deal that was just finished with the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. But it's not just going to be cost alone anymore. That is a decision for where to put your manufacturing. I think risk mitigation and resiliency will sit shoulder to shoulder with costs.
Great, thanks. We'll move on quickly to our next poll. Jeff, if you could launch that one for us, please. So that's going there. While the audience is answering this question, how long do you think it will take to get back to early 2020 shipping volumes? We will turn to our panelists here and get their take on what the 6-month and 12-month projections are, and how much recovery will the freight carriers see in the next 3 to 5 years. So it's sort of that, short-term horizon and long-term horizon. We had this for everybody, so I don't know who wants to start.
I'll start. I still see, again, B2B, B2C. In B2C, there's going to continue to be growth in volume, but I think B2B will be the canary in the coal mine, I think, for the economy. And I would gather that might see a rebound maybe in a year, assuming that there isn't a bounce, a recurrence of the pandemic. Armstrong Associates puts a bounce back in the latter part of this year because of replenishment of inventory that's kind of been backed up.
Tim or Lance, you guys want to weigh in?
Lance, I'll let you go. I'll let you start on this.
Got it. Now, real quick, we're seeing the LTL from start to climb out at about 7%. It dropped in volume about 20%. We're starting to see 5-7% week over week, pacing out, kind of climbing out of the hole there. So I think in 6 months, we'll see the volumes back to kind of where we are. I think full truckload will get a little closer to previous market rates, but I think it's going to still take a little while to recover for that. Airlines, I'm going 24 plus months on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Jim?
Yeah, I'm thinking 2022 for airlines, kind of air freight. I mean, half of air freight capacity is in the bellies of passenger aircraft. Parcel is easy. We're never going back. That horse is out of the stable, and it's like we just jumped into 2025. So that's not going back.
Okay, let's see what the audience said. 40%, 12 months, 16%, 6 months, 28%, 18 months, 16%, 24 months. Small percentage at under 3 months. Any surprise there?
I don't think so. I think a year is about right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could call folks optimists, but I like their sentiment.
Right. Yep, I agree.
Great. All right, let's pull that down, Jeff, and then we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so last major topic, the impact on transportation visibility and control. Talked a bit about throughout the time this afternoon, multi-sourcing, server provider diversity. This makes transportation visibility and control extremely critical. How much do you have? Where is it? When will it arrive? Where should it go? Now, all important decisions that you have to make to mitigate risk and ensure your supply chains run smoothly. Just turning over to the survey here, and I'll get Tim to go first and comment on some of the stats that came back here.
Thanks, Scott. So for the audience, think about the concepts of like these mega trends that folks have talked about. The convergence of like cloud computing, data analytics, AI and enterprise IT platforms. They've all been big trends. And I think this is going to kind of accelerate some of that focus, especially as it relates to supply chain visibility and control. Again, with my caveats though, those trends are going to continue insofar as the traditional, I'll say, inputs of supply chain management, let's say warehousing or space constraints or labor constraints are addressed. If you don't have the physical frontline space to manage volumes and you don't have the people to move the goods, that data and tools of the future are only going to address part of the supply chain. So I think those things are important, but there's the traditional things that operators and IE and folks who deal with labor have to deal with and are kind of pushed to the front of the stage right now.
That's great.
Yep.
Lance, you want to go next?
Yeah, I love I love the point that 5%, only 5%, had any kind of disruption because the proof of deliveries haven't been, physically signed and executed. And I know it was a shakeup due to the COVID, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it can evolve this process and soften everybody, that says, well, we won't pay a freight bill until we have, the signed POD. Things are still running pretty well without that. So I'd love to see that it hasn't shut anybody down or nobody froze up completely. So I'm hoping that that's a process that will evolve pretty quickly.
Great. Bob, you can weigh in here if you want before we go to the audience question on the next slide.
Yeah, I just think 26%, only 26% are likely to change their TMS. I thought that was pretty low, only because, the entire world has changed in terms of, the supply chain transportation management paradigm. The shift, the acceleration and shift from large shipments to more frequent, smaller shipments is gonna change the technology requirement. TMS systems traditionally have kind of ignored parcel, and they're going to have to take it into account.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we'll just flip over to our last question from the audience, from the survey anyway. And we are running a little long on time, so we've got a few more slides, probably be another 3 or 4 minutes before we open the floor to questions, but we haven't seen any come in so far. The new normal will not be the same as prior to COVID. What pros and cons are trending for the new normal supply chain? I think everyone can weigh in here. I don't know who wants to go first, but anybody want to volunteer?
I'll weigh in. I think one of the big ones is the push and professionalization of the supply chain management stage. I know it's been going on for a couple decades, but literally procurement and supply chain officers are getting a lot more visibility, and folks are seeing behind the curtain to all the challenges that they manage. So I think that's one of the big pros out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would jump in. I jump in on a pro that you've got a lot more what I've kind of termed a softer interaction between trading partners and whatnot, that I think is really driving more relationships and deeper relationships. And some of those technology trends are being accelerated just because of the requirement that, okay, we've got to do this remote, we've got to be this kind of proactive. So I think it's really pushed a lot of that acceptance forward. So I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, I would only.
Bob, you want to be? Yeah, go ahead. You want to be negative and do a con?
Well, okay, I'll do a con. I think the con would be the companies really got to get ready for paying a heck of a lot more for B2C shipments. I think, once UPS and FedEx catch their breath, I think they're going to have to look at how do they get paid to do these, little boxes being delivered by large trucks to small houses. Great.
So let's move on to just a little bit on technology outlook. I think it's pretty, from our survey today, we've had 26% respondents are more likely to change their transportation management technology. I know Bob thought that was a little bit low. 50% are investing in IT that will allow them to meet the rise in demand. Wanted to spend just a little time here on the technology outlook. Let's go to you first, Bob.
Yeah, I just think cloud infrastructure and multi-enterprise architectures are going to change, and I think those will be driven by omni-channel. TMS systems and multi-carrier systems are going to have to be more scalable to get to more users who are working remotely. They've got to get more secure. They've got to be more resilient because now they're, really supporting mission critical activities. And they've got to be multi-enterprise just because, companies are going to be shipping from more points of shipment, including suppliers, 3PLs, and stores. So, that requires a different sort of architecture, just like distributed order management systems evolved.
Great. Tim?
So for global carrier networks, I think you're going to see, and you are already seeing it, large integrators partner with platforms and networks. You look at like FedEx with their recent announcement with Microsoft and so many of the partnerships with some of the big retailers they have. So part of that is just a general trend in building alliances, but that concept of flight to safety, you talk about in currency where folks fly to the US dollar. I think the same concept goes for transportation. Large global organizations provide a level of safety and reliability, or at least perceived to be. And so I think that pairing off is something that we're going to see continue. And then certainly, how do you compete against that big team out in Seattle? So they're the trendsetters, and that's going to be another ongoing challenge across global carrier networks.
Great.
Yeah. And from predictive analytic perspective, I think as we go forward in the market, the victory belongs to the quick and the agile, the quick to respond, those folks that have the infrastructure in place that can do, especially in carriers that want to do, be more dynamic in their pricing, more responsive to the market through various changes in analytics. All of that AI, that machine learning, which is so perfect for logistics, because there's so many variables and so many things changing all the time. The folks that have the ability to adopt that and then affect it out into their market are really going to be the big winners in this going forward.
Great, thanks. We don't have a ton of questions. I guess people got them out of their system in the survey. So first question, and I don't know, maybe Tim is the best for this. Are there higher surcharges on shipping biologics?
I see higher surcharges, certainly. You could talk about the big integrators going all the way down to regionals or locals that would add specific surcharges. I think you'll have a it's just a trend that we've seen in transportation in general, continued surcharges depending on either the environment or the product mix that a carrier is working with a manufacturer on.
Hey, Lance, you saw your local carrier delivery community.
Yeah.
You saw people walking off the job when they realized there were
Yeah.
biologics in the truck.
Yeah, specifically in Louisiana, the driver was transporting COVID-19 samples and just parked the truck and walked away. There haven't historically been a lot of those surcharges, but we're starting to see more of those come into play that says, oh yeah, if we're going to do this, it's just got everyone's heightened awareness.
Thanks. There's one more question. It feels a little bit, I'll just ask it, but it feels a little bit about, around the uncertainty of what's going on, which I think it trickles down into the supply chain and shipping and delivery. We recently learned from the CDC in a lot of states that we have no reliable data on COVID-19. How will that impact data modeling, or how might that impact not just knowing a lot around the pandemic and what will happen? Anything that you guys can comment on there?
Yeah, to say the lack of tests will lead to uninformed decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and reliable tests as well. So we've seen, it's kind of a coin flip depending on the tests and how effective they are. Yeah, I still think there's so many unknowns, but the more we can aggregate and more transparency in that, the better decisions everybody can make.
Yeah, Scott, I would just add, we have, not that we're going to rely on other countries, but we do have partners and groups in, let's say, different parts of the world that have their own version of the CDC. And so looking at other models that come out of those organizations help us to calibrate as we get more information. So similar to what Lance said, is that there won't be one single entity that provides all the information. I think you have to calibrate with what you're seeing from other groups around the world and their government entities.
Great. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to end today. We'll let everybody get carried on with their day. Thanks again to Jeff and Rachel and Amy from Inbound Logistics for helping put this together. And also thanks Bob, Lance, Tim. I think you guys did an amazing job. And finally, thanks to our audience for joining us today and taking a little time out of their day to entertain our opinions and comments and thoughts on things. Wish you all the best. Please stay safe and healthy.
Scott, thank you so much for moderating today. Everybody in the audience, thank you so much for coming by. The presentation will be available to you. If you couldn't jump in live, the video will be available to you from Inbound Logistics and from Pierbridge as well. The soft copy of the presentation will also be available for download. Thank you to Bob Malley, Lance Healy, Tim Leary, and of course to Scott Moore for moderating, and to John Agolia for behind the scenes help today. Everybody, please be safe and take care. And for more information, you can come to inboundlogistics.com or visit Pierbridge as well. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.